ado, and as it's 12:30, Alison, I'll hand over to you.
Rob, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's session. This is a subject very, very close to my heart. So please do feel free, as Rob said, to ask any questions, make any comments, suggestions and observations as we go along. And although part of the way through, I'm going to ask you to think about what goal you would like to achieve, be that in your personal or professional life or both. Please do begin to have a think about that now as we go through the following sections. So this is what we're going to be covering today. So I've got 6 science-based actions for you to help you start strong in 2022 and help you achieve what you set out to do. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about are understanding the link between values and motivation, and the importance of small, consistent actions in addition to best ways to manage your energy. So let's get started. These are some of the outcomes that you can expect by the end of today. So hopefully you'll have been able to define one specific goal and, more importantly, why it matters to you. You'll understand the link between incremental change, motivation and impact. And as I said, we're going to be talking about some tips on how to best manage your energy levels and get some insight into those. So we're actually going to start off with a poll, which should be coming up on your screens very shortly. So as you're doing that, and please do all participate, because it's actually quite interesting to see other people's responses as these polls come up. So just put your answers on the poll when it comes up, and I am going to keep going with the presentation, given that we've got quite a lot to cover today. So let's start with the first science-based action, which is 10-10-10. So I really like this quote by Jim Rohn. I think it's very appropriate, because part of what we're going to be exploring today is all about choices and decisions, and thinking about how you'll feel about the decision in 10 minutes, 10 months and 10 years, and why that is so important when you're thinking about defining and choosing your goals. So this can also make a real difference in terms of where you decide to allocate your energy. And the reason for this is that your brain is hardwired to look towards short-term pleasure. And I'm going to take you through why that's important. However, when we look at long-term gratification and its ramifications, you'll find that you're able to make smarter decisions and take more consistent action. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail whilst we're waiting for that poll to come up. So there's a now famous study, and if you want to Google this, you can Google the marshmallow study. It took place in the 60s, but it spanned 40 years. And it all started with a Stanford professor called Walter Mischel. And he began conducting a series of really important psychological studies. He and his team basically tested hundreds of children. Most of them at that point were around the ages of 4 and 5. And what the study revealed is now believed to be one of the most important characteristics for success in health, work, and life in general. So basically, this is how it went. The children were offered the choice of either a marshmallow treat immediately or a larger reward down the line. Now, as the children grew up, the teachers conducted lots and lots of follow-up studies, and they tracked each child's progress in a number of different areas with really surprising results. So the children that were willing to delay gratification ended up having significantly higher scores in exams, better overall health and response to stress, better social skills as reported by their parents, and generally better scores in a range of life measures. So as I said, you can discover more about this if you Google the marshmallow study. But the long and the short of it is the researchers, as I said, ended up following these kids for 40 years. And over again, the group who delayed gratification proved that this ability or characteristic was critical for success in life, and in particular in achieving goals. So what does the 10-10-10 refer to? Well, we're going to defer to Warren Buffett on this one, and other billionaires who have put this strategy into practice. Essentially, what it entails is before making a choice, these millionaires and billionaires ask themselves how they will feel about this particular decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. Now, as I said at the beginning, your brain is hardwired to look towards short-term pleasure. However, looking at long-term gratification and its ramifications allows you to make smarter decisions. So as Stephen Covey succinctly put it, happiness can be defined as the fruit of the desire and ability to sacrifice what we want now for what we want eventually. So what this rule essentially does is it forces you to think further ahead, to be smart about your decisions and to assess how you could respond. In other words, it saves you from making knee-jerk reactions that could impact your long-term success, erode your energy, and prevent you from reaching your goals. So let's just quickly summarize this. So the marshmallow study highlighted that if you want to succeed, you must be disciplined, you must delay gratification and take action instead of getting distracted or doing what's easy. So these are some small tips which will help you put what we've just talked about into action. But there's one area that I would really like to highlight for you, and that's the Seinfeld strategy. So for those of you who don't know who Seinfeld is, basically, he's one of the highest rated comedians of all time. So I'm just going to tell you a little story about this because it's something that I have started implementing. So this is the story of a young comedian, a guy called Brad Isaac. He's just starting out on the comedy circuit. And one night he found himself in a club where Jerry Seinfeld was performing. In a subsequent interview, Isaac detailed what happened when he spoke to Seinfeld backstage and asked if he had any tips for a young, upcoming comedian. Seinfeld said the way to become a better comic was to create better jokes, and the way to create better jokes was to write every day. Now, what can we learn from this? He told Brad to get a big wall calendar that has a whole year on one page and hang it on a prominent wall. The next step was to get a big red marker and for each day that Brad wrote to put a cross in the day that he had done his writing. Seinfeld said, after a few days, you'll have a chain. Just keep at it and the chain will grow longer every day. You'll like seeing the chain, especially when you get a few weeks under your belt. Your only job is to not break the chain. So what can we learn from this, and why does not breaking the chain matter? Well, Seinfeld's regarded as one of the top 100 comedians of all time, and he's won numerous awards, such as top TV episode of all time. So he's definitely worth listening to. And I think what we can learn from this is something about consistency, why slow and steady wins the race. So the power of incremental change and improvement and taking consistent small actions. And finally, getting started quickly avoids procrastination. So this point means that you've got 2 minutes, essentially, to put up a bit of a struggle in your mind, which your mind loves doing. Remind yourself of the long-term benefits and your why, and why it connects to your values, why this particular goal is important to you, and then take action. So I just want to reiterate the key point there. Your only job is to not break the chain. And what that does is it enables you to take a lot of your emotions out of this and take consistent action to grow the chain that you're building. So let's go on to the second piece of research, which is all about making a plan. So again, I love this quote by Rick Daniel. Goal setters see future possibilities and the big picture. But what do we do with that? So since writing this content a few days ago, I've focused on a big personal goal and then breaking that down onto my wall planner in order to create my chain. But that's not all that I've done. I want to talk to you about creating your big goal and the research that's established a strong connection between goal setting and success. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So this was a study run around athletes. And it was a journalized study that I found which revealed that athletes who set their goals before they proceed with training are much more motivated. But that's not all. Researchers discovered that they had better ability to control their actions and align them to their goals compared to those who didn't have a game plan. Now, the research also stated that it's vital that elite athletes mentally prepare for competition using well-known psychological skills, one of which we'll be discussing at the end, like goal setting and anxiety regulation. So all of these, combined with physical training, have been shown to dramatically improve results in athletes. But what can we take from this in the workplace and also apply to our personal lives? Well, I think it's quite obvious, but nevertheless, a really useful reminder that based on hundreds of studies, including some run at Houston University in the United States, that the major finding of goal setting is that individuals who are provided with specific, difficult, i.e. stretching, but attainable goals perform better than those who are given easy, non-specific goals and obviously no goals at all. But at the same time, the individuals must have sufficient ability, they must accept the goals and be ready and willing to receive feedback related to their performance. So again, what can that mean for us? So I mentioned that I've already begun since writing these slides, and this is the kind of thing that I've been doing. I've been reflecting on my priorities and intended outcomes in the short, medium, and long term, taking into account the 10-10-10 rule we spoke about. One of the things I've asked myself is, are they still aligned with my values? And am I truly motivated by them? I've gone from the big picture outcome, which is the first step, and really thought through what that could look like. On my large yearly wall planner, which arrived from Amazon, I've got two actually. I've got one for my personal and one for my professional goals. I've been working on one specific goal for each and broken these down into small micro actions. And I've put those on my wall planner in order to start my chain. I've built in progress evaluation and mini rewards for myself, and they're written on my wall planner. The other thing that I've done is I've got accountability and feedback from a friend who I'm very lucky to say is also an executive coach, which is extremely helpful. But please do not underestimate the power and the value of having an accountability buddy or somebody that you can talk through your goals with and bounce ideas off. I've already started crossing off the squares so that I don't break the chain. And I'm assuming it's worked so far that it's going to stop me from getting distracted so that I can keep to my plan. I've given my goals enough stretch, but not too much that they're overwhelming and seem impossible. And lastly, and we're going to talk about this together in a bit, I visualized it all coming together and getting done. So there's a few things here that I just want to highlight for you. Personally, I know that I can get distracted and impatient sometimes. And what that does is it diverts my attention to trying to find a better or faster way. So if this is something, for example, that you habitually do that could prevent you from staying on track and keeping on top of it, what could that be? How does your goal motivate you and fit with who you are now? Is it an old goal that something you feel that you should do? Or is this current, and have you assessed it as being really relevant to who you are now? And do you have somebody that can help you? So I'm just going to quickly touch on micro productivity because I think it's a really important area. And again, there's been quite a lot of studies done on this. Essentially what it means is taking action in small bursts. So one of the things that I've started doing is breaking my activity down into 5-minute chunks. So I've been thinking during my lunch break, for example, I've got 5 minutes. What can I do in terms of a micro action to advance my goal? Now, you obviously don't need to do it in 5 minutes. You can do it in 10 or 15. And neither am I saying that you should take every minute of every day to focus on your goals. Obviously, we all need downtime. But what I am saying is take those small chunks and make use of it. And it's surprising how by doing that consistently, the time will really mount up. Now, these small wins do one big thing. They drive motivation. The more you can see progress, the more motivated you'll be, assuming that you have an aligned goal. And the more gratifying that will be, for example, not breaking the chain. And therefore, the more committed you will be to continuing to take action. So let's just summarize that quickly. Committing to your goal is really important, but you won't be able to commit to it unless it resonates with the person that you are now. So in other words, you've taken your big idea, you've validated it for yourself, and you feel that it is worth committing and sometimes sacrificing for. Then you can break it down into small micro steps. You can put it on a wall planner and you can take action in 5-minute bursts. So these are some of the things that you can do to help support you in taking consistent action. So let's say, for example, you're committed to writing a book. What you do is you break down the work of writing into a set number of pages, chapters, or words. And the important thing here isn't how you break down the work leading towards the successful completion of your goal, but it's more about breaking it down into small, manageable micro projects and thinking about what you can conceivably get done in a 5 to 10 minute period of time, and then setting a schedule. So taking time out when you would normally have a coffee break to scribble down a few pages in a notebook might be something that you could do if that was your goal. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to try and keep an eye on any questions in the chat box. And let's move on to how you can reverse engineer it and why the science tells us that this is a great thing to do. So why do we want to reverse engineer our big goals? So one of the things that this does is it provides clarity by laying out the steps needed to get you there. So by reverse engineering, essentially what you're doing is you're building good habits. As in, it's better to invest your limited focus and energy on building habits rather than specific goals. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you've set the goal that you're going to clear out the garage. And so what you do is you take a day over the weekend, you steam through it, and you feel really good because you've been able to check that goal off your list. But what if your habit isn't to keep your garage tidy and to have a system? All that happens then is that you've then got to set another goal, which is going to take another day out of your life to go back in again in a few months or however long it is and steam through the garage. Whereas if you set your goal to clean the garage and develop a habit that supports keeping it that way, that will then underpin the goal and reduce the necessity for you to have to keep redoing these things over and over again. So I hope that makes sense. So engineers are already good at reverse engineering. It's part of your role. So one of the things that an engineer might do is use a reverse engineering process to stimulate creativity, drive innovation, and solve some of the trickiest problems. So what you're doing essentially is building a framework of success by breaking down in reverse order. So from the very beginning thoughts right through to goal completion, the steps and tasks that will be required to effectively achieve your ambition or your goal. So let's just summarize that quickly. So I put committed down there again, and that is a recurring theme. Because if you are not committed, none of this is going to happen. And it's quite important actually to think about what commitment means to you. And commitment doesn't necessarily mean full-on sacrifice, but it may mean spending 15 minutes less with your family over the weekend, whilst you devote that time to supporting you and your goals. So reverse engineering is taking your big idea, breaking it down, and then taking action and micro action, if necessary, on each of those steps in order to reach it. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack now. We're going to be talking about mindset, because mindset underpins some of these key areas in terms of successful goal setting. So I've got another poll coming up for you. That should hopefully come up for you quite soon. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So what I'd like you to do is to just pop your answers there. I can see that both Rob and Kirsty have put the poll up. So let's have a quick look at mindset. Now, growth mindset. This is somebody called Carol Dweck, who has done a tremendous amount of research, fascinating research actually, on this. If you've ever wondered what's been holding you back from being as successful as you could be, she says it could stem from the way that you think. So there's a stack of research that she has compiled on this, but essentially what it does is it revolves around the power of believing that you can improve. And that's essentially what a growth mindset is all about. So let's take a little bit of a closer look. So this is a growth mindset. Now I work with engineers and I've been delivering training and development for over 28 years now. And one of the things that often comes up in conversations as we begin to skirt around this subject is, of course, I've got a growth mindset. I'm flexible, I'm open-minded, I've got a positive outlook. I already have it, and I always have had. So this is not a growth mindset. This is a false growth mindset. Recent advances in neuroscience have showed us that the brain is far more malleable than we've ever realized. So research on brain plasticity has essentially shown how connectivity between neurons can change with experience. With practice, neural networks grow new connections, strengthen existing ones, and build insulation that speeds the transmission of impulses. So these neuroscientific discoveries essentially have shown us that we can increase our neural growth by the actions that we take, such as using good strategies, asking questions, practicing, following good nutrition, for example, and also good sleep habits. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I put together these slides is that our belief sets our intention, which generates focus, which drives positive outcomes. So at this point, I'd like you to think about your own mindset. Do you genuinely have a growth mindset? Or is this something that you would like to cultivate more? Is this something that you believe has value? Because studies have shown time and time again that those who maintain a growth mindset and continue to focus on developing it approach life with greater motivation and positivity, and have overall enjoy more success, both in the workplace and in their personal lives. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about a study that was done on that, on some children. Just bear with me 2 seconds whilst I get the slide. Hopefully you can see that. And what it did is it demonstrated exactly what I have just said, that intelligence is malleable. So at the same time that all these neuroscientific discoveries were gaining traction, researchers began to understand the link between mindset and achievement. It turns out if you believe your brain can grow, you behave differently. So the researchers asked, can we change mindsets? If so, how? And if that does happen, what could the likely outcomes be? So this began a series of interventions and studies over a really long period of time that proved that we can change a person's mindset from fixed to growth, and that when we do, it leads to increased motivation and achievement. So one of the studies that I've got up on the screen for you ran with 7th graders, in America. They were taught that intelligence is malleable, and they were shown how the brain grows with effort. Now, what happened as a result of that is that there was a clear increase in their maths grades, but that's not all. Studies on different kinds of praise has shown that telling children that they're clever encourages a fixed mindset, whereas praising hard work and effort cultivates a growth mindset. So when students have a growth mindset, they take on challenges and learn from them, therefore increasing their abilities, their confidence, and their achievement. So what can we learn from this? I think this study and a range of studies actually around growth and fixed mindset have really highlighted the following for me: that the brain is malleable, and it remains so throughout our lives. It doesn't just stop at age 7, which is where most of the neuroscientific research that I've read is really focused on. We can learn new things, we can develop new habits, and we can create new pathways. And that's why in a lot of corresponding research, you'll hear about things like if you learn new languages, that creates additional new pathways in your brain. So some of the things that I've done is I'm working on learning my 8th language, and I play speed word games. I will switch up this year and start doing some more things out of my comfort zone in order to create new pathways in my own brain. And what I've found is that this has helped me in terms of not just big picture thinking, but pattern recognition. So we've seen that attitude is everything, and questioning yourself about whether you really do have a fixed or a growth mindset. And if you have a fixed mindset, that's fine, because the brain is malleable and it can learn new things and develop new habits. And what I want to really emphasize here is growth over speed. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to achieve your goals. What matters is that you grow in the process and that you are consistently working towards them. And then lastly, I just want to highlight the fact that we're all human. We're not machines. And we can't just put ourselves on autopilot and get all of this done. Some days will be better than others. And so that's why in my plan, if you remember me talking to you about earlier, I've put small mini rewards in there. And I've highlighted that I absolutely cannot be spending all my time focusing on my goals, that there needs to be balance. And that's really, really important, both in and outside of the workplace. So to finish up on this section, what I'd say to you is adopting a growth mindset means thinking critically about your potential to learn and improve. It means doing what challenges you, to expand your capacity for achievement and develop yourself personally and professionally. It means making a shift from no, I can't to yes, I can, regardless of how overwhelming or frightening it may seem to do so. So let's take a look at energy, which is our before last section. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about that as you complete this poll, which either Rob or Kirsty will be putting up for you very shortly. And again, please do take part in this, because as I said earlier, it's so interesting to see where your peers are coming from. And it really highlights, I think, some of the areas that we commonly are challenged with and commonly find a lot easier. So let that be a guide to you as you think and reflect upon your goals, both personal and professional, in the coming year. So I want to talk to you a little bit about reflective practice. And if you've been on any of my webinars before, you'll know that this is something that I am extremely passionate about. So I've been doing this for over 35 years. I have my own way of doing it. It's very simple. I'll be doing it after I finish this webinar. I'll be looking at what went well, what didn't go so well, what I could have done better, what I liked and will keep going forward, and what I can learn from this. So I'm going to give you a couple of different ways to adopt a reflective practice. But as I said, just really stress that this doesn't need to be a long drawn out process. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about on this section are the difference between casual thinking and reflective practice, and how it can help you with planning and conserving your energy. So in its simplest form, reflective practice is thinking about or reflecting on what you do. So it is closely linked to the concept of learning from experience, in that what you think about, so essentially when you think about what you did and what happened, you then are charged with deciding what you would do differently next time. So thinking about what happens is something that we all do. It's just part of our human nature. However, the difference between casual thinking and the reflective practice that I'm suggesting here is that reflective practice requires a conscious effort to think about events and develop insights into them. And the insights part is the important part. So let's have a look at how this can help us planning, in terms of planning for the coming year, and what it can do to support us in conserving and growing our energy. So this is really helpful. A reflective practice actually is not just useful for personal fulfillment, emotional intelligence, and right communication, in the sense that we become able to see and understand ourselves more objectively. Actually, it's the foundation of all management and leadership learning, because what it does is it drives self-awareness. So, as I said earlier, you may have heard me talk about this before in previous webinars. One of the things that you can do to drive your own reflective practice is to use a simple format like stop, start, continue, and change, which works really well. What it can do in terms of our goals for the new year is it can help us focus where we need to, examine and assess our goals more effectively, and be smart in terms of where we apply our energy. It means that we're going to tailor our goals and adjust our habits to who we actually are, not who we think we should be. Okay, so again, a really, really nice quote there before we move on to energy by Confucius. So let's talk about your dips. These are actually, if you haven't heard about this, is something called your circadian rhythms. Now, again, there's a lot of fascinating research in this area. maybe you've already started researching methods and techniques to boost your well-being and performance. I know many of us have, especially over the last 18 months to 2 years. And there's a really deep body of research that shows that managing things like sleep debt and understanding your circadian rhythms can unlock new levels of focus and energy. So this is what's known as the two-process model of sleep regulation. So I'm just going to quickly talk to you about sleep debt. What that does is it refers to the cumulative hours of sleep that we lose over a period of roughly 2 weeks. And that's relative to your own personal sleep needs, yours individually, not everybody else's. Some people might need 6 hours, some people might need 9. So this refers to your cumulative hours over 2 weeks in relation to your specific needs. Now, the bigger the number, the more likely a person is to struggle with key behaviors like decision-making, verbal acuity, and empathy. In other words, if you're not getting enough sleep, functioning becomes more difficult, especially when it comes to the things that you would perhaps normally take for granted. So your ability to build rapport, your ability to manage an action project, for example. So what about your circadian rhythm? Why is that relevant? Well, one way to think about it is an internal timer that tells you when to be awake and when to be asleep. This means that it affects the duration of your sleep and what your brain does at night. And as I said earlier, yours is unique to you. So the circadian rhythm also modulates our waking behavior, affecting the peaks and dips in our energy throughout the day. It has a direct bearing on our focus, including things like attention, our ability to learn new skills, and our working memory. All of these things being the building blocks of productivity and achieving goals. So it's no wonder that when our circadian rhythm is misaligned, such as when you're jet lagged, for example, or just not getting enough sleep, you experience poor levels of performance. So it helps to think of your circadian rhythm as your daily energy schedule. It's like a rolling wave of energy peaks and dips across the day. Now, during the day, there are 2 natural windows of high alertness and wakefulness, which for many fall late in the morning and late in the afternoon. And at that point, every cell in your body is naturally programmed to be alert and ready to perform. Now, during your dip phase, which generally occurs in the early afternoon, your body is naturally programmed to be relaxed and in recovery mode. So if you are carrying a sleep debt, your dips will be significantly amplified. So in conclusion, I'd like you to think about your own dips and I use an app to help me with this, start to really identify where your peaks are, where your troughs are, and start to build your key projects, goals, and milestones around those times during the day. So, as we come to the last section, I just want to summarize very quickly this little section about dips. There's some really, really interesting research, as I said, around circadian rhythms. And one of the things that it can do is to help you generate and stick to your new goal-setting habits. So I'd highly recommend that you check that out. There's also something really interesting that I've been looking at for a while, and it's called Kolb's learning process diagram. So essentially, I'm just going to take you through what those are, but they're the 4 main stages of a learning process as a continual loop, but I also use them for my own personal development.
Alison, just sorry to interrupt you. There's been a couple of questions relating to the sleep app you use. Would you be able to go into details which one that is?
I will. 2 seconds. I'm just going to get it up on my phone, actually. It's called Auto Sleep. So I started off with the free version. It essentially looks like a little dark blue square with a yellow round circle in the top right hand corner. And then I went on to the paid version, which is $3.99 a year. And what I also do is I measure my heart rhythms. And I use deep breathing techniques to sustain my energy levels through those peaks and troughs. So that's also a really useful thing to do. But when you join all of those things together, they work really well. And that sleep app will give you regular feedback on your sleep dips and troughs. Thanks for that, Rob. So yeah, please do feel free to interrupt if there's any other questions. So just want to quickly touch on this Kolb's learning process diagram for you. I know it sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but as I said, it's something that I've been using for quite a while, not just in learning and development, but for my own personal and professional development as well. Essentially, it encompasses these 4 areas: experience, reflection, learning and conclusion, and then planning and experimentation. And then you dip back round to experience. So it's experience, reflection, learning and conclusion, i.e. what can I draw from that? And then planning and experimentation. Now, I am big on experimentation because I find that when I allow myself to experiment, I'm a lot more creative and less constrained. And so many organizations out there now, you can actually, again, you can Google it. There's a lot of fascinating research on experimentation, failing fast. Some really key organizations within the engineering industry that I spoke to last year, actually, like Dyson, are building this into their culture. And it has far-reaching effects, not just on, the narrow area that we're talking about today, but on culture as a whole, which are really quite fascinating. So you can use Kolb to sustain a reflective practice. So I said I was going to give you 2. So the first I gave you was stop, start, continue, and the second is Kolb. So it's Kolb's learning process diagram. If you just Google David Kolb, you will get that come up. The key thing that it will help you to do is to see what happens if your goal isn't valued enough and enable you to course correct before it's too late. So just want to end this section by saying that too often people set goals based on their thinking alone. You're much more likely to achieve your goals if they align with your values. Now, we are going to be building that into a course in the new year when we look at branding. And it's something that every time I introduce it in one of our other courses, such as New Engineering Manager, Aspiring, Leading Without Formal Authority, people get really engaged with it. And it's made me realize that this is something that by and large we do not do enough of, or we do not do enough of regularly. So bring your heart into the goal setting process and examine how your goals align with your values. But to do that, you first need to identify your values. So those are your underlying life principles that you believe are important, critical actually, and are at the core of the individual that you are now. So examples of values might be freedom, justice, autonomy, personal growth, fairness. So these are all things that underpin the person that we are. So I would highly encourage you, if you haven't done this recently, it's something that I do every year, and I've built it into my goal setting practice. Sometimes it doesn't change, but what I like to do is pick out one, and that then becomes my focus for the coming year. So we've talked about reflective practice. At this point, I'd like you to take a moment to think about your big goal. I mentioned it at the very beginning. What big thing maybe, what action or project would you really like to get done this coming year? Maybe, as I said earlier, you want to write a book, improve your fitness and flexibility. Maybe you want to change jobs. Maybe you want to start an art practice or yoga. I'd like you to take a few seconds to think about that. Maybe you already have something in mind, but what I can tell you is that the next section, and I can again tell you this from personal experience, will really help you. So let's get started. So I'm going to start again with a really fascinating piece of research. So again, this is something that I talk about in some of my courses. I want to stress that visualization does not just apply to athletes, although this is an athletic study. People like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you can Google, one of the ways that he became the world's strongest man was by building a visualization practice into his fitness regime. But this study is all about great athletes and why visualization plays a really key role in their success. Now, one of the things that's less obvious is that visualization increases confidence and motivation. And again, less obvious, it affects and sharpens players' muscles. Let's find out how that works. So this was actually discovered by a physiologist named Edmund Jacobson. When he had subjects visualize certain athletic activities. So essentially through the use of really, really sensitive detection instruments, he discovered subtle but very real movements in the muscles that corresponded to the movements that the muscles would make if athletes were performing the activity for real rather than in an imagined way. So in other words, he measured muscle activity and found that imagining and visualizing an activity produced a very similar outcome to if the athletes were actually physically performing this activity. Now, that was taken one step further in 1967 by an Australian psychologist called Alan Richardson. What he did is he visited a team of college basketball players. So Richardson watched players taking, free shots at the hoops. And what he did is he began to record each player's accuracy. He then randomly divided the players into 3 separate training groups. Group A were instructed to come into the court and spend 20 minutes a day practicing their free shots. Standard. Group B were told to stop playing completely and do nothing for 30 days. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Group C spent 20 minutes a day visualizing successful shots, but were told not to touch a basketball over the course of the 30-day study. Now, after 30 days, obviously Group A had improved. They were on the court, they were making their shots, they were running up and down, and their accuracy was measured to have been improved by 24%. Group B, unsurprisingly, didn't make any progress at all. But Group C demonstrated a 23% improvement. So just 1% short of the group who practiced every day. And I find that absolutely mind-blowing. So you can Google this study. It's a real thing. The results of Richardson's study are not coincidental, though. Visualization of a goal has a profound effect on the human body. And a goal here can also mean things like an important event, such as a presentation, hiring or letting go of an employee, having an important conversation with your partner or the work colleague. But it's not just about superficial visualization. When emotions are figured into the equation, the process becomes even more effective. Why is that? Our brain sends out an impulse that instructs our neurons to perform that act, even if our body remains still. This in turn creates a new neural pathway, which trains our body to perform the visualized action. So this process of emotional visualization therefore primes the mind, which allows your body and mind to operate at its peak. So I'm just going to zip through these last bits so we've got some time for a few quick questions at the end. And I just wanted to draw your attention to this study, which said that people who vividly describe or picture their goals are 2 to 4 times more likely to accomplish them. So what can we learn from all this? So I've put some of these on the screen for you. And I want you to not just think about your goal, I want you to visualize it. Take 20 seconds. Everybody can commit 20 seconds to doing that at the end of your day today. So I do mine on a Friday evening. I do a debrief or on a Saturday morning, and sometimes both. But I will be visualizing this evening like I do every evening, sometimes only for a second or two, sometimes for longer. Bring emotion into the process, because we know that that impacts the outcome, not just mentally, but physically. It's been measured. Do it regularly. And then lastly, something which many people overlook is all about intention. Set your intention and expect results. So the goal that I said to you about, I asked you about a few minutes earlier, visualize it. The science is there, and it proves that if nothing else, it will help, not hinder. I just want to also say to you that the more often you visualize, believe it or not, the faster your goal will materialize. Now, my dad was a scientist, and he always said to me, don't just take something at face value, test it out, record the data, and then make a decision about whether you want to keep going with this particular technique. And I've done that. I have tested this out time and time again. This is not magic. It does take work, but it will speed things up. So to finish off for today, I just want to leave you with this quote. Setting goals is the first step from turning the invisible to the visible. So thank you so much for attending today. And Rob, any questions?
Oh, yes, indeed, Alison. I've got a link. Do you want me to put that in the chat box?
Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
All right, so there we go. Do you want to talk about the link?
Yeah, what Rob's just done is I found this amazing workbook for you. It's a PDF, and not workbook as in it's heavy work, but workbook as in fascinating, because it draws on a lot of what we talked about today. And I really believe that giving you something hard that you can take away in your hands and use, maybe this weekend even, will really help you to consolidate what you've learned on today's webinar. So thanks, Rob, for putting that in. You should see that in the chat box.
Yeah, it's in there now. Okay, I've got a few questions. The first one, not breaking the chain on a daily basis works well if you only have a couple of goals. If you've got more, I think you're much better looking at longer time frames, like making progress every month. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what I've done is I've taken a couple of big goals. So I'm only doing it with 2 goals because it's the first time that I've done this, you know, in terms of not breaking the chain. And what I've done is I've reversed engineered them, broken down into micro goals. And that is what I've got on my planner. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think let's keep this practice flexible. And like I said earlier, you know, test it out, see what works for you. This is just one suggestion, but yeah, absolutely agree with you there.
Excellent. Along a similar lines, too many goals can be difficult to manage, especially if you're starting them all at once. It may be better to prioritize.
Yeah, 100% agree. Completely agree. And prioritize. You know, one of the things that I do when I've got multiple goals is I actually talk to my manager, you know, multiple projects. And then what we do is we brainstorm, and that prioritization then becomes a really clear picture for me, which I can then put into an Excel sheet, create a timeline with, and move forward from there.
Excellent. Next one, what kind of rewards do you use?
Okay, so I've just done one. I've just bought myself a new pair of trainers, and I didn't allow myself to order the trainers until I'd completed certain steps for my goals. That was quite hard for me because they were on sale. So it's things like that. The other thing that I'll do this during the day actually, is I buy myself really nice tea. And every now and then during the day, once I've completed a large chunk of work, is I'll go downstairs, I'll take 5 minutes and I'll do what the Japanese do, is I'll go through a mini tea ceremony where I really savor the tea. So it doesn't need to be something expensive. It can be going for a short walk. I hope that helps.
Excellent. And the final question I've got here for now is, how do I find out whether I'm a 6 or 9 hour sleeper?
Sorry, that you broke up slightly there, Rob.
Sorry, Alison. How do I find out whether I'm a 6 or a 9 hour sleeper?
So you use the app that I told you. What you do is you actually press a button. I have it on my phone and on my watch. You basically press the button as soon as it's lights off. And what it does is it records the time from lights off to sleep. So you'll not only be able to see how long it takes you to fall asleep, but how long you've been asleep for and the quality of your sleep.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions we have. And again, what's the app called again?
So let me just get my phone up again. Hang on 2 seconds. Okay, so I think it's just called Auto Sleep. So if you look it up in the App Store, it's called Auto Sleep. I've been using it for 18 months now. Really, really robust, reliable app with actually great customer service too, which is quite rare for apps nowadays, especially the cheapy ones. So yeah, $3.99 for a year.
Excellent.
All right, listen, thank you, everyone. You can reach me through L&D. We've got some really exciting courses coming up here. If you want to take a screenshot of this is just something that I've put together to, at a high level, really summarize what we talked about today for you. Okay, and these are just some final tips. And one of the things that I love to ask myself is, what could I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And it's a surprisingly powerful thing to do, because what it does, it allows you to bypass your fear. And then there's another thing that I use, which is, if they can do it, so can I. And I have that on auto repeat. So these are some of the upcoming courses that we've got, where we touch on a lot of the aspects that I've talked to you about today. And again, any questions, please do feel free to come back to Rob, myself, or any of the rest of the team in L&D. So all that remains for me to say is, have an amazing end to your year. I hope you have a very good Christmas, and wishing you all the very best for 2022.